Hi, I'm Meta Spencer. I hope you guys were as excited as I am today because we get to go to my hometown, Berkeley, California, and talk about the most interesting two topics in the world, sex and war. So I get to have a good conversation with another emeritus professor. He and I are more or less the same vintage, I imagine. And he is a retired professor of public health. I think his field is population and family planning. And he has a book that I think has to be the prize title of any book I've come across. If you're a publicist, you couldn't ask for a better title than this one, Sex and War. I would think you could sell several billion copies of that. And I hope you have, because I want to find out what you have to tell us. I'm sort of a specialist on war, and if you're the specialist on sex, we can really find some common ground, I think. That's terrific. Hello, Malcolm Potts.
Good. Well, hello, and thank you for that generous introduction. I was a small child in World War II. My eldest brother was a professional soldier, fought in Korea. And I've been to countries where wars have taken place, and I was in Bangladesh just after a war when thousands of women were raped, and I was trying to help those women. So I've been close to some of these issues. The book and my sort of thinking has been very heavily influenced by Jane Goodall, who studies chimpanzees. Jane and I had the same tutor at Cambridge. We were the same age, and I've had the pleasure of staying in her house in Gombe Park in Tanzania and watching the chimpanzees. Not the thousands of hours that she's spent, but when she first saw chimps, she thought they were more peaceful than animals. Then she discovered that they live in tribal groups and that they defend a defined territory. And when they see a member of the opposite group that's by itself, they will go out and kill it. Chimps are incredibly strong, and killing generally means an attack by several other chimps, twisting their limbs out of their sockets, pulling off strips of skin, and they often die within about 24 hours. And about a third of chimps are killed by other chimps. So we had a common ancestor with them 7 million years ago. And we also, I think, are a very tribal animal, and we can sadly be a very violent creature. But the killing among chimps is done by the males and not the females. And I think that's also true of Homo sapiens. I mean, I have a good friend who was in the war in Eritrea, and many of the people in the army were women. And the women fought as bravely and as effectively as men. They were defending their country, they were defending their rights. And you say when they had a successful sort of fire battle, they would also have very good sex. But in most wars, men in the field and women at home. But I think women legislators are very important, and not just sort of prime ministers, but we need, I think, to have in democratic countries a large number of female legislators in the senior sort of whatever Senate and governing system that we have, which I think will lead to more peace.
Okay, that's an interesting and provocative introduction, because I was trying to imagine what the connection is in how sex is related to or sexuality anyway is related to warfare. The first thing that came to mind was the Greek play Lysistrata, where the women, I don't know, maybe they sort of fulfill your notion of the differences between males and females, because the women refused to have sex with the men until they stopped fighting the war. I think it causes a little friction between the two sexes, however. Is this play. I mean, it was a comedy, but maybe there's some truth in it.
Yeah, I'd be interested to see some social group in the contemporary world doing that and see what happens.
I've heard people kind of half seriously propose it, but I don't know of any women who've adopted this as a policy. The other thing that came to mind, I have a woman friend who was a journalist, a war correspondent. And she told me something that I guess is unique, but I'm not sure that it's unique. She said that she was once in a situation where with another journalist a man whom she barely knew, and they were under fire. And I don't know what the situation was, but they both expected to be killed within 10 minutes. So they had sex. And she expected me to think, oh, yes, of course, that would make sense. But I didn't. I thought, wow, that's weird. And I wonder how weird that is, because she seemed to think that was that's what any sensible person would do under the circumstances. And I don't think that's very common. Have you heard of any such, well, people don't go around talking about it, I suppose. But is there any connection of that kind that you've heard of?
Yes, some of my friends from Ethiopia involved in war, where women were in the trenches beside the men, said that if they'd had a successful battle, then they would often have sex. It's different, very different from your account of your acquaintances. But when they were peaceful and secure, then they had good sex. And so the violence
was well afterward, or was just kind of a way of celebrating the victory that they had just.
I think to some extent, yes, it was celebrating the fact that they'd survived and gone through another dangerous episode. So I suppose, if you think you're going to die or you're very pleased that you weren't killed, then the relationship between sex is fairly easy to understand.
Okay, so you have a theory about warfare being biologically grounded somehow. Please elaborate.
Yes.
I want to hear your whole story, how you think this whole thing works, because it's not something that I mean, I've heard a lot of theories about warfare, but connecting it to sex, not so much.
Yeah, first of all, I think the basic tribalism and anger and war with neighboring groups is something that's in our DNA, just as it is in chimpanzees, and that it's mainly the males that are doing the fighting. And I think that's fairly easy to understand, and I've seen it in many parts of the world. So the opposite thing that interests me is, I would like to live in a world that was peaceful. Are we going to have a peaceful world if we create one where women have more influence than they do in the current world? And the more violent countries, I think, are often very biased against women. I mean, I've spent time in Afghanistan. It's a very patriarchal society, and it just seems impossible to stop them fighting each other. And the women just suffer in the process. But if you have a democratic country with women playing a larger role, I think that's one pathway to peace that we should encourage and rejoice in.
Okay, because you're pinning a lot on biology, and if that's so, then men are sort of programmed to want to dominate and to dominate women, and insofar as women have somehow, or somebody has contained that impulse and reduced it to the point where women could have an equal role in society, what would be the biological reaction of males in general, if you think there is any biological given in this?
I think there's a biological given, and it's a very profound one. Men don't fight wars for king or country. When it comes to being in the trenches, your loyalty is to the person next to you. It's the band of brothers that Shakespeare talks about, that are loyal to each other, risk lives for each other. One of the things I looked at were people who had medals posthumously, because in a war, it's not uncommon for somebody to lob a grenade into the other person's trench. And there's a significant number of people, maybe 5 or 6 people, and one of them will simply fling himself on top of the grenade before it explodes, knowing he will be blown to pieces, but his friends will survive. And that's the sort of instant, dramatic example of loyalty that men have to each other when they're fighting. And I think we know less about women, but I don't think they have that giving their life loyalty to the person next to them with a gun. But I think that's very much part of war. And again, war is not fought for kings or countries, it's fought for the person next to you. And you're both risking your lives together. And that probably is biological. The chimpanzees say they map out a territory which they walk around the edges and make sure it's safe. And when they see an isolated chimp in the next territory, then 3 or 4 chimps will go out and kill it. So they always have to have a larger number, which again is a basic principle of Homo sapiens war. I mean, the country with the most soldiers in the field usually is the one that wins. So I think there are...
Why do you suppose just having a solitary chimp is such a provocative thing? Why can't they? Why? What's the biological imperative behind killing
I think,
an isolated male? Is it always a male chimp, or does it matter whether it's male or female?
It's a male chimp. Because they want the females. In fact, the killing is to enlarge the territory, which will then there be enough fruiting trees to support a large number of females, and therefore you will get more descendants. I mean, that's the argument here that's sort of subconscious, but it's what's driving the fighting, and it can be validated by the number of births taking place and the size of the territory that the particular group of chimps own. That's being looked at by other people, and that seems a genuine relationship. You have more space, more fruiting trees, more food, you can support more females, you can have more offspring. End of story.
Okay. And they do not, if it's a female out there alone, they don't kill her.
They want that female.
Do they capture her?
Yeah, and sometimes the females are captured and they will join the new troop. And if we look at fighting in sort of very traditional, sort of simple societies, it often ends in capturing women and bringing them back and raping them and giving them to one member of the tribe.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And the women are sort of savvy enough so they don't have any choices, but they will have children and be with their new conquerors.
Mm-hmm. Yes, that sort of sounds like the old-fashioned way, because I don't think we do that as much. I mean, yes, of course, there's rape, but and I shouldn't say, of course, as if it's a trivial matter, but when they're bombing Mariupol, for example, today, they are bombing males and females and children and everybody, and so it isn't really. I haven't heard anybody say that what they want to do is take over the females and make them into their concubines or whatever. You think there's some real change there, or is it just circumstantial?
I think there's, I've seen some reports of rapes in Ukraine, not on the scale that I've seen them in other countries. So I think that's a sort of variable but certainly in the Bangladesh war, it was a very explicit thing that the Pakistani troops lived in sort of large barracks, probably built by the British, and they would the captains, the people in charge, would bring in Bangladeshi women knowing they were going to be raped. So that, I think, was a thing that was sort of done from the top down. It's one of the things that saddened me and made me angry about the situation when I was trying to offer abortion to these raped women.
Uh-huh.
And some of them were as young as 12 years old. And they sort of lay in bed like a log. I mean, they were just destroyed emotionally. And it was a very sad thing to see, to be, pregnant when you're 12 years old because some soldier has raped you, probably repeatedly. In fact, they raped them until they either got too pregnant to continue the rapes or until they got so many sexually transmitted diseases they wanted to get rid of them. But it was a large-scale, visible, horrible thing to watch and to be close to.
Okay, tell me about your stay in Bangladesh, because you were an obstetrician.
Yep.
And how did what took you?
I was working for the International Planned Parenthood Federation, and the Secretary General at that time was a woman. And she said, look, we're having all these rapes reported, Malcolm, will you go and see what you can find out? So I organized a team of about 6 or 7 obstetricians like myself, one from Australia, I think 2 from Britain, some from America. And we went out as this team. And
excuse me, but what year would that have been?
I'm told about dates. So it was in the 1960s. It's a long time ago.
So this is when Bangladesh was separating.
Yes,
was this when they were separating from Pakistan?
Yes. The Bangladeshis call it the War of Liberation. So there was that separation.
Mm-hmm.
And
so there were Pakistani soldiers raping Bangladesh women in Bangladesh.
Yes, with the blessing, if that's the appropriate verb, of the commanders. It wasn't, occasionally a man with a gun on the battlefield is going to rape somebody, but this was a systematic, heartbreaking system to have tried to pick up.
So you had a team of people there. I interrupted you. You were sent from Britain to Bangladesh, basically to do abortions as needed.
Yeah, and a large number of rapes, and we did a very small number of abortions. It was very visible and well reported within Bangladesh. And I think by what we were doing, there were many women who went on being pregnant and we couldn't get at, and we wanted their families and their husbands to, accept them and support them. And I think because of the publicity and discussion that was taking place, that indeed was a trend that certainly improved during our stay. So not all because the normal tradition in the society was if the woman was pregnant by rape or by any consensual sex, it didn't matter, it just got rid of her. She was unacceptable. So trying to create a society where women had been raped and going to have a baby, but her partner would accept it was difficult and not universal, but some of them did do that, and it was very heartwarming to see it when it happened.
Really? Now, so what would be the ratio of the women who had been raped and impregnated? Well, first of all, I wonder how frequent pregnancy was the result of rape. I guess you could do arithmetic and figure out the probabilities, which I have never done. But not everybody who's raped gets pregnant, thank God. And the question is how many of these victims were pregnant, and then of those, what ratio was there of women who decided that they would try to keep the pregnancy and as opposed to those who requested abortion?
My guess would be about half became pregnant, and that most of the pregnant women would have liked to get rid of it. The numbers that were treated by people with experience like myself who could do it safely was probably less than, probably about 1 in 20 or so.
Oh, only about 120 had access to safe abortions then.
Yes.
Oh.
Which, if you know what you're doing, can be pretty safe.
Mm-hmm.
And some of the wives of doctors and things like that were organized and were corralling these women who had been raped in some houses and trying to find them and help them and bring them together. So there was sort of feeling across all sort of levels of the country to be sorry for and help these women who have been raped. And I think that the work that we did helped the women who survived the rape, I think, as well as the women who we could successfully terminate the pregnancy. And I still get sort of messages from Bangladesh every so often. And there was a radio programs released, a thing for well reported, and also well reported in the United States and Britain. So it was a very visible pattern of and very large numbers of people being deliberately raped.
Were most instances of rape known? And did many women try to, I don't know what the word I want, it's not hide it, but cover up the circumstances of their pregnancy to make it look as normal as possible? What was the situation where a lot of these women in situations separate, quite far from their husbands and or anybody they could plausibly attribute to the pregnancy to, and therefore what I'm trying to imagine what the average social situation was, the circumstances.
I don't think that many of them tried to conceal the rape. Again, it was partly because of the public discussion that was going on in the country about what had happened and the desire to help these women. So, to the best of my knowledge, there weren't many women trying to pretend it was their husband's child or that it was a consensual relationship. And especially, I think, amongst the very young girls that were pregnant. Mm-hmm. Something very viscerally disturbing, seeing a 12-year-old that's pregnant as a result of rape.
Well, to what extent could people who decided that they would try to assimilate this baby into their real families, the males and the females and the whole grandparents and so on, how successful was that? And to what extent would you say that the child growing up would be made constantly aware of the fact that he was not really wanted?
I mean, I couldn't answer that question because if there were groups who did this and with success, then they'd become invisible. All I know is the ones that did not try to do that and were trying to get rid of the pregnancy. I don't think there were many sort of abandoned children left sort of on the street corner. I think that women were trying to use unsafe ways to end pregnancies, and we were trying to use safe ways. And I don't know, whether there was a sort of huge, long-term emotional sort of trauma to these women, or whether when the successful safe abortion had been done, whether they, within a reasonable length of time, got back to being fairly happily related to their husbands and having children they wanted. we really didn't have the ability to follow up and answer those questions. Just can speculate.
Well, if you have trouble imagining what that situation is like, you probably have even less opportunity to know the next question, which to me is equally fascinating. What goes on in the mind of the rapist? And these men who did this, whether they did it impulsively or under orders, how do they live with themselves?
I think there were several very different attitudes. One is a man with a gun who thinks he may die tomorrow and might as well rape somebody. The other is people that were sort of corralled the soldiers and the women for rape together, were encouraged by their officers. And again, if you're in a foreign country in a war and somebody might get killed and your commanding officer is saying rape a woman, then probably a lot of people just do without too many sort of hesitations on the way. So I see it as not as the rapes we were dealing with were not the sort of typical ones in warfare where a man has a gun and thinks he's going to die and rapes a woman. They were more systematic. One of the biggest systematic rapes in history was when the Russians captured Berlin, and the soldiers then encouraged the men to rape the soldiers because they'd suffered so much as the Russians had from the Germans. And that was a very big rape. Again, I don't know what happened to the pregnancies. And probably it's
I'm not aware of that. That's interesting because that, and I don't think I'd heard that.
Apparently, the soldier shoots a knock at the door. I'm going to rape you. My commanding officer once told me to do that. So there were very large numbers, and a lot of suffering in the Berlin. Was in the women and fear and horror.
There's a contrary situation. I've been told that Nazi soldiers never raped Jewish women.
I've heard that, and I don't know whether it's true. I mean, did they think they just were not human? I don't know. I don't know what sort of data we have on that. Again,
you don't know of any research on that question.
No, I don't. There may have been some, but clearly, this is a very powerful topic. So collecting data on it is quite difficult, and there's not many people trying to do that. And there was some, the media tried to report, and I think that's healthy.
Well, are there other historical comparisons? In other words, if it's true, and I was just told, somebody told me that the Nazi soldiers did not rape Jewish women, are there other wars that you know of in which the victorious soldiers did not rape the women and had a policy of avoiding it? And if so, what did it mean to them? What was the ideology that maybe these women are not quite human or something?
I think it's a good question, and I can't answer it. I mean, there's, the written history of rapes is not sort of very comprehensive. They're told it is taking place, but people don't explore and try to record the women's emotions and the decisions that they make. Mm-hmm. So I think it's a good question, but I can't answer it.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, look, the notion that we are biologically programmed to fight is a very interesting one that people teaching peace studies always confront. This is one of the first topics that comes up in a course on peace and conflict studies are we biologically programmed to be warriors? And I take it that is your view. Can you take it?
Yes, I do. I think that Jane Goodall's data on chimpanzees' warfare is very carefully collected and very powerful. And then I say we have a common ancestor 7 million years ago, which isn't very long in sort of biological timeframes. And I think we have the same behaviors, and I'd be surprised if we didn't. But for millions of men, they're not very near the surface. And you only get these patterns when you've got several things coming together to sort of facilitate them. I mean, most men in the world today don't rape people, and most of them are not living in a society that sort of encourages that. There are always in all societies a low level of raping, and often a legal system that punishes people appropriately.
You suggest that the future of humankind as a viable species depends on our being able to reduce the amount of violence in the world, and that you have the solution. Please, please tell us how we're going to save the world from ourselves, or at least from the male versions of ourselves. Although I have to say, some of the women politicians strike me as pretty damned aggressive. You know, I had trouble voting. I have dual citizenship, Canadian and American, and I did vote for Hillary Clinton because I could see what the alternative was. But I think I would not have, you know, I did so with great reluctance because she was such a hawk. And I'm not. and you know, we can think of a lot of other very strong women when they have come into power. And Indira Gandhi was no slouch as far as being an aggressive person goes. And I think, well, the same, well, I won't even name some of the others.
Yeah, but that's one of the things I'm trying to say is that I'm not looking, although I'm not against it, you know, for female prime ministers. What I want to see is legislatures that have a lot of women in them, so as well as men. But most legislatures are dominated by men at the present moment. The women are minority, fighting for reasonable things. But it'd be nice to see half the women in any democratic government system being female. I think that would make a lot of differences. So it's not just, you know, Margaret Thatcher, it's lots of people whose names you don't know, but will be working as women in groups and trying to push things in the right direction. And will always, you know, there'll be situations, I think, where women as well as men are going to say, these really bad things are happening and we've got to stop them. It's something that we can, I mean, the women seem to be taking a very visible role in the Ukraine at the present moment. And they are putting their lives on the line as soldiers. And
yes.
And I think they're explicit, you know, we are defending our country, our freedom. This is what it's all about. And then there are women in the front line, and there were women in the sort of logistics system, keeping the flow of ammunition and food and whatever else is needed, and information as well flowing to try and defend the Ukrainians.
Okay, well, I actually have not been following this specific role of women in Ukraine. And I wonder if there's something comparable in Russia. And, you know, I just have been trying to affiliate with a group of people in Europe who are concentrating on trying to find ways of assisting anti-war activists in Russia. and of course, is being an activist of any kind right now in Russia
Yeah.
is a very vulnerable and dangerous thing.
Yeah.
So we probably can't find these people, many of them. But I'm just wondering if you would say that the majority of them are women. I did have contact with a group a number of years ago called Mothers of Soldiers. They were extraordinary women. I did a book about Russia, so I that and the dissidents in particular, and the Mothers of Soldiers were remarkable. Soldiers would defect because the Russian soldiers in those days, there was a lot of internal violence.
Yes.
There were within the troops, within the barracks and the training grounds and so on. These kids would kill each other.
Yeah.
They weren't even killing the enemy. They were just killing each other, or there would be huge numbers of suicides among the soldiers who were conscripted.
Yes.
And these women were really brave. They even had a march down into Chechnya. I think it was during the first Chechen War. And they led a group of people who marched in. And I remember the most interesting story was about I think a colonel or something. And his mother had marched all the way from Moscow, and she came up to him and she said, "Son, you come home now. It's time." And he did. He went with her.
No, that's very healthy. I think women are going to be the drivers of peace in all sorts of different situations.
But just recently, maybe a few months ago, I think, possibly even a year ago, I can't remember exactly when, Putin has put an end to this organization, Mothers of Soldiers. They're not allowed to function anymore, any more than, all of the other groups that were peace-oriented, like Memorial, which was an organization that started off trying to just collect artifacts from the Gulag, people who had left photos or, any kind of incidental property. They collected it and kept them as souvenirs or as memorials of the people who'd been in prisons in the Gulag. And then, of course, they began to do real peace work whenever a new conflict arose someplace. But they've now made it impossible for them to function as they were. So, I would love to believe that the Russian women would be as effective as we'd like to think in calling for peace. But I don't see much evidence of it so far, unless you know of things I don't know.
No, my intuition and limited knowledge of Russia is that large numbers of women would like to contribute to a more peaceful world, but it is difficult to do that. It's not impossible, and I think whatever's going to happen will be driven by women more than men. And I think there's an awareness at the present moment that large numbers of Russian soldiers are being killed in the Ukraine, and there'll be a lot of mothers that are grieving and also willing to become politically active to try and say, this is a crazy war. I don't want any more my sisters' children to be killed. So I have seen just reports in the New York Times and things about women's groups in Russia trying to bring peace.
Switching to a more domestic scene, there's so much going on now about the legality of abortion in the U.S.
Yeah.
I kind of thought we were past that. Can you give me your take on what is this all about? Why all of a sudden are these states like Texas basically outlawing, not just basically, I think in every sense of the word, really outlawing abortion. And many states are following suit. why now? And what do you see as the likely outcome of this trend?
The likely outcome is will have zero impact on the number of abortions taking place. I've studied and done abortions in many different countries, and making abortion illegal has no impact on the number of abortions. A woman's pregnant, she wants to get rid of that pregnancy. Her first question is it dangerous? Is it going to cost me money? Will the abortionist want to have sex as well? It's not, what does the law of my country say? And there's the Guttmacher Institute has tried to estimate levels of induced abortion in different countries, and there's no relationship to the abortion law. So those people who, as an embryologist, I respect a diversity of views about the status of the early embryo, but those pro-life people need to be, and pro-choice people need to be on the same table here. Laws make no difference on this abortion taking place. What they do is to kill women, because women go to unsafe abortions. I was a young obstetrician in London in the 1960s. Abortion was illegal, and I learned that women would go to enormous lengths and risk their lives to end an unintended pregnancy. So I also know that abortion is a simple 5-minute operation, at least in the first 3 months. And now we have medical abortion. So the technologies are there. It's a question of enabling women to access them. Because if they don't, they'll still have the abortion and they'll risk their lives or their lifelong. Some of, a young woman has an abortion and it succeeds, but she's left infertile for the rest of her life. And that's really a horrible thing to happen to a person. So I think that, men's DNA is to control women's reproduction. From a Darwinian point of view, the sort of costly thing would be to have a mate who has a child by another man, and you put all the energy that you put in as a parent to bring in that child which you think is your own. So to be cuckolded is, from an evolutionary point of view, a very expensive thing. So I think there are biological reasons.
I've heard that, in fact, now that we have DNA and testing, that the discovery is that it's very common. Much more common than maybe the husbands realize, that this child is not really their own biological offspring.
Insight into that was about 20 years ago, looking at blood, people giving blood donations, and a significant number couldn't be a parent.
Could you? What was? I think I heard an estimate or a report on that how frequent that was. Can you recall how many of us are not really the sons and daughters of the father we thought?
I say that a minimum of 5% are more likely 10 to 20.
Is that right? And is it known how much that varies from one society to another?
I don't think so.
Okay.
I think it's also, it's a difficult thing to study, and if you want to get data, you don't want to go around discovering who's not the child that they thought they were. But I say that the blood groups was one thing that I know, and then you also, I think we're both aware of more recent studies with DNA.
I know there have been cases in which a family immigrating to Canada, I believe, there was a problem because they did tests and they found that one of the children really wasn't the offspring that he claimed to be, and so they didn't want to let him in. And this, I happen to belong to a church where this Sunday morning the person said, well, if it were Jesus, they wouldn't let Jesus in. Anyway,
it's common for children to be born to a different father.
Yeah.
And I don't think it matters in the sense that both parents are probably going to love the child and put the energy you need to put into bringing up children, providing nobody makes it in the face sort of study for the man. If he thinks it's his child and brings it up, that's fine, and it'll be successful. But again, I think it's this cuckold lifelong investment in a 18, 20 years investment in a child that was fathered by another man is, from a Darwinian point of view, very wasteful, very expensive. And I think that's why behaviors tend to sort of clamp down on that possibility.
Mm-hmm. So what do you think is going to be the outcome in the U.S. if it seems as if the Supreme Court may reestablish the laws prohibiting and justify and validate local laws that prohibit abortion. What's going to be the result of that? You say women will go ahead and have abortions.
Very easy to predict. And I'm 87 years old. I spent a lot of time looking at abortion in many countries. And I can tell you with the utmost certainty, it will not stop women having abortions, but it will kill some of them because of that. That's the only outcome of that kind of law. There's no other outcome in any other country.
Well, there are pills, there are pills, of course.
Yes,
now.
And that's good.
And what I don't understand is why it is simple for a woman who's wanting an abortion, but in a state where it's prohibited. Why can't she just order by mail a handful of pills and handle it?
Yeah, that is happening. I mean, there are groups trying to facilitate the transmitting the needed medicines to states where it's illegal. The woman needs to know that having a medical abortion is uncomfortable. You'll get a cramping, you'll get a lot of bleeding. Delivering, a 3-month-old fetus in the toilet is an emotional challenge. And I would say to women, if you have access to the things, then you need 2 things. Have a sister or a friend with you. Don't do this alone, and know when it's in your interest to go to the emergency room if you just had too much bleeding. But I'm delighted that such things, such medicines such as misoprostol exist, being close to making sure that they're as widely available as possible. And I think it's a huge step forward to be able to have a medical abortion, just as it was a huge step forward to have an oral contraceptive. The technologies are giving women the reproductive freedom that they all deserve.
Mm-hmm. Would you say that these pills are as, I don't know whether I want to say convenient or as undisagreeable as medical abortions that you would perform?
I think in most cases they're preferable, because it is the woman who's making the decision, it's the woman who's using them, and I think it's her right to make these decisions. Women can't do abortions on themselves, they have to have somebody else. That's often costly. Those people can be exploitive, demand sex as well as money. And so having pills like misoprostol that women can take, if they're informed about them and they've got somebody with them, I think it's an important step forward. And what I would
and the procedure itself is not any worse.
No.
Uh-huh.
You've got to wait, until you know that you're pregnant. And that's all right. And so, if somebody opens their computer and look at the web, they will find, I think, quite a lot of responsible groups saying this is the information you need and this is how you'll get these. So that is
So it is working now in places like Texas that women can find out how to get these pills and actually are getting them that way. Is that?
Yeah.
Well,
the scientific history here, is just a little aside, is interesting because it's about sort of gender bias. These pills are prostaglandins. They are things that are made by the prostate. And between the two world wars, people looked at all the glands, the thyroid gland, the pituitary gland, the testes, the ovaries, and then they said, what the hell does the prostate do? And they isolated prostaglandins, but they had no idea what it did. And it was only a friend of mine who was an Indian pharmacologist working in Tanzania. The women told him when they went more than 40 weeks in pregnancy, that they would give their husbands oral sex. And he thought, I wonder whether there's anything in semen that makes the uterus contract. So he got semen and he got a rapid uterus and put it on it and it contracted. And so people were looking at prostaglandins because it's a name, it's male, it must be to do with males. They weren't asking what it did in females. And what it does in the females is to make the uterus contract. And so it's very powerful. And now prostaglandins are, we've got a good company in China making a quality product and they're getting around more and more.
Huh. Well,
and they don't do anything useful in men.
Oh, yeah. I never heard this story before. Okay. Taking these pills is no more dangerous than other forms of abortion.
No.
Oh, all right.
At that early stage, you're not going to run. If you took misoprostol, when you're 39 weeks pregnant, you might rupture the uterus. But if you take it when you're 8 weeks pregnant, I don't think there's any real danger except failing to work. And every delivery is also associated with birth. The placenta is the Latin word for cake, and the placenta, it's quite a big thing about this big. And so it always leaves a wound in the uterus, and the uterus has to contract, otherwise you'll bleed very heavily. And postpartum hemorrhage was a common cause of death in rural Africa and things like that until we got misoprostol into those villages, something that my late wife was very successful at doing it. So they could take something as soon as the baby was delivered. But we had to tell them not to take it before the baby's delivered because you can rupture the uterus. And we had about 2,000 women in a big trial, and 2 of them deliberately took it before they could deliver the baby because they were so unhappy in their marriages, they thought it was a way to commit suicide. Happily, the uterus didn't rupture, but it was interesting insight into a poor society and a lot of unhappy marriages. Some very happy ones, but also unhappy ones, and women can't get out of it.
Going back to this thing about the connection between maleness and aggressiveness or participating in wars, I think even on television, ads that I believe they're not very explicit, but I think it's an ad for testosterone or some kind of male hormone. I don't know whether people can buy these things like over the counter or by mail or something, but I'm wondering, first of all, is it a good idea for very many men to take this stuff? And second, if they do take it, are those folks more aggressive? Are they more likely to participate in the kind of gender behavior that you've already attributed to warfare?
Testosterone makes you violent. That's a well-tested, demonstrated thing. And but also, if you take exogenous testosterone pills, then the human body says, oh, I'm making lots of testosterone. The natural production of testosterone goes down because the pituitary glands sees this testosterone going round and says, I don't need to send any more messages to the testes. So it's rather a complicated situation. It doesn't last. But it does, say, make people more aggressive and more risk-taking. When there was a big, discussions on Wall Street, and people measured testosterone levels in people making investments for us, and they found that the risk takers had higher testosterone.
Really?
The ones that had higher testosterone took the most frequent financial risks. Sometimes they were successful, but other times they failed. So just to the audience here, if you've got money to invest and you're looking at the long term and what you will have when you retire, then get a woman investor, because the evidence is that women investors make much better, more long-term investments. I mean, women going to have children, and a child's a long-term investment, and their brains do the same things with your money. If you think you'd like to make some gambling, as it were, on quick returns, then have a male person invest your money on Wall Street, but be careful.
Oh, that's fascinating. Well, now I'm now trying to speculate in my mind about the hormonal balance of various kinds of bold entrepreneurs, people who'd really do. I mean, I'm thinking of the last few days of Elon Musk, taking over Twitter. Is this his testosterone acting, or is there some kind of
I wouldn't be surprised. And just as background, it's quite easy to measure a man's testosterone. You give them some chewing gum, and testosterone comes out from the salivary glands. It goes into the chewing gum. It's a very uninvasive, easy way to measure testosterone levels. And this is what people have done, on Wall Street and places. You don't have to even to take blood. You just say, "Oh, there's a piece of chewing gum. Please chew it." And this is the reason we're going to measure your testosterone. But that's on the side, but it's important. And I think we will get more and more of it. I'd be interested in giving chewing gum to men on the battlefield. As far as I know, this hasn't been done, but I would imagine that the band of brothers and their loyalty to each other would be associated with high testosterone levels.
Well, would the testosterone increase in a situation like a battle? If they need all this muscle power and violence power, does the body produce a little extra under those circumstances?
Yeah. I mean, testosterone comes from the testes, but also a little bit from the kidneys. And, I have estrogen and you have testosterone circulating in your body, and it comes from the adrenal glands.
Yeah.
And we both have each other's hormones.
Well, what would happen if I took extra? I don't think I want any, but if you gave me some testosterone injections, what would happen to me?
My guess would be that you would be more aggressive and more risk-taking.
Really? Oh. Well, to some extent, I think more women would be. It's a good thing if we got a little more assertive.
Yeah.
I maybe we should all have a morning testosterone pill. What happens if you took estrogen?
It would counter some of my testosterone, make me a more gentle person, I guess.
Well, males who have cancer of prostate cancer. Sometimes I've known several men who had surgery where they I think they removed all of the things producing testosterone and maybe gave them estrogen as a way of controlling the growth of this cancer.
So prostate cancer is the most common cancer in men. A lot of it is treated just by zapping it with various rays and sort of MRI machine. And that works well. It stops the cancer, but it also damages the nerves in that place. So it may be that the man is partially impotent after that and doesn't have the normal sequence of responses in sexual intercourse that a man who hasn't had his prostate treated in some way would have. So it does have those effects.
Well, now, if you made a list of your friends, the people you know quite well in terms of their personality, and you classified them, these men are sort of aggressive go-getters, and these men are more reserved and cautious. Now, do you think that then if you did a testosterone test, you would be able to know which ones were which?
Possibly, yes. Not with 100% efficiency, but in a general big field, I think you would be able to know which was which.
So maybe we need to go around giving more estrogen pills to men, and then we'll have a peaceful world.
Yeah.
So thank you very much. This has been an absolutely fascinating conversation.
Wonderful place
All
to
right.
be.
I've enjoyed this so much. Thank you. Bye-bye. Project Save the World produces one of these shows 3 days a week and sometimes more. This is episode number 444. You can watch these or listen to them as audio podcasts on our website, tosavetheworld.ca. Eventually, we even post the transcripts there. When you get there to the website, look around. They have conversations going on there all the time about 6 global issues, plus potential reforms in governance, economics, and civil society. To find a particular talk show, enter its title or episode number in the search bar, or the name of one of the guest speakers. After you've watched or listened, scroll down and share your own thoughts about the show with the other viewers. This is a place for dialogue, so please join in. I'll see you there.